Finances are the number one issue most student pilots don't make it through their flight training. One of the biggest problems I see is people get into flight training and they don't understand how much it actually is going to cost. It's a complicated process, this whole flight training thing, when you're coming from an outsider's perspective, looking in, never done this before. You're hearing all these things about, well, you need this amount of experience because this is what the Code of Federal Air Regulations say, and this one flight school says, oh, well, we have a different code we follow, so, here's our bare minimum quote. And that's really the problem is most of these places are giving you bare minimum quotes, but they aren't giving you realistic quotes. I see students get 3/4 of the way in at other flight schools, and then it's a lot more expensive than they thought, and they actually didn't have the finances in order or it together in order to actually begin that training. And thus those students are forced to quit, put their training on pause, maybe wait a whole year and a half, because once you quit and you put it on pause, it's real easy not to go back. So people kind of get into this lull for a while. And then they, year and a half later, have the finances and they come back to try to pursue their training. But that made that certificate that much more expensive because flight training is a proficiency-based skill. It's like welding, it's like painting, it's like anything else that's skill-based, is that the more you're doing it in a shorter amount of time, the more proficient you get, provided you have adequate training, and the better you're going to be. And as far as the budget goes, the more on budget you're going to be. So one of the biggest, so that's something that we try to do here at Dobbs Flight Service that's a little different than most flight schools that I've seen out in the market. Now, some of them are doing a pretty good job of giving you the quote, and some of them aren't. So that's something different that we do here at Dobbs Flight Service is we try to provide a very comprehensive quote. I like pessimistic views because that means that you're well prepared and that hopefully we can beat that price from the get-go. The FAA says under Part 61 that a student's going to need 40 total flight hours. They're going to need 20 with an instructor, 10 is going to be solo. But the problem is if you receive a quote off of minimum flight hours for private pilot, you might as well consider that worthless. You could probably light it on fire, you could take it to the trash can, you could do whatever you want to do with it, just don't use it as credible information. Nobody graduates at the bare minimum hours. This is your hardest certificate in my opinion. You're going from never flying a plane before to having to know all of this information and acquire this completely new skill. The learning curve is steep. So that's why AOPA reports that the national average for private pilots is somewhere between the 70 and 80 hour range, double what the minimum is. So what we do here at Dobbs Flight Service is we give you a quote off of data. We basically are pretty good at about getting most students in at 65 hours. We quote you off of 55 hours of dual flight instruction with an instructor because it's pretty realistic. And then we also include the pre and post briefings because another thing is that you aren't just paying for the plane's time, you're paying for the instructor's time, which is the linchpin of all of this flight training debacle. We also make sure that we include check ride prices in that as well because check rides are super expensive. It's nothing to do with the flight school. If you're a traditional Part 61, I have no control over the check ride price, but we do include that so that it prepares you. So if you go to our website, when you look at our pricing breakdown, that's what you're going to see. You're going to get a comprehensive quote, and most of our customers are able to come pretty much on budget. Now, there's always these variables of weather and maintenance that can hinder proficiency, so I still tell people to budget an extra 15% more than what I actually quote them. So that's really a big problem I see is a lot of people get quotes from other flight schools in order to make their prices look cheaper, tell you the bare minimum. And what I mean by the bare minimum is they'll take the instructor hourly rate and the plane hourly rate and they'll times it by 20 dual flight instruction hours. Well, that's just not realistic. That's not how that's going to work anyways. You're going to most likely double those dual instruction hours. They're not also including the pre-briefing and post-briefing times that they typically charge for using their instructor. So here's some actions or some things that you can do when you're out and about shopping, because you need to absolutely shop for the best flight school that fits your situation. And when you're getting those quotes from them, you need to do the following. The first thing is you need to find out immediately their hourly rate for their airplane that you intend to flight train in and the hourly rate for the instructor. Then you need to, especially when it comes to private pilot, look at their breakdown off the hours. And if they have anything less than 55 hours of dual instruction, you need to go ahead and disregard that. Take the instructor hourly rate and times that by 55 hours. Then you can also take 65 total hours of flight time and times that by the aircraft rate. Then you need to ask them, do you charge based off instructor time, or do you charge for instructor fees based off of Hobbs time? Hobbs is this little meter that we run inside the plane, and that's how we determine how much the plane's actually been used, because we have either the TAC, which is off the RPM gauge, which measures engine speed, or we have the Hobbs. The Hobbs is more accurate to how long you've actually been utilizing that plane, so everybody in the industry charges off of Hobbs. If they charge off of Hobbs, then your quote based off of just the hourly rate of 55 times the instructor hourly rate should be somewhat a good quote. But if they charge off instructor time, well, then now you have to contend with pre-briefing and post-briefings. So you need to find out how much they typically set aside for pre-briefing and post-briefings. For us, we set aside 15 minutes of pre-brief because it really sets up the student for success to have the best lesson possible. Hey, this is what we're going to do. You need to go out and hit these actionable items. And then we have a really intense debriefing at the end, like, okay, you did really well on these things you can get better. We AI notes them, we do whatever we can to help the learning process go along. And that is where a lot of your learning comes from, is that debrief. It's very vital, it's very important to your success in flight training. So you need to figure out, are they charging off instructor time or Hobbs time? If you put all that together, you can, based off of about a 65 to 80 hour private pilot, you can have a pretty good glimpse of what you're actually going to be charged. I also recommend always just having an extra 15% more than what you actually see there on that quote. Now, a little tidbit about schools that make you pay up front. If the school makes you pay up front, like most accelerated programs, they are going to be somewhere, nowadays I see prices somewhere between the $90,000 to $110,000 range for these bigger schools that make you pay completely upfront for their entire program. You need to look at the details. How many hours, again, for private pilot are they affording you in that quote? Because if you used up all that money and it was a bad quote on their end, you still now are responsible. You might not have finished your training, but you're still responsible for continuing on and paying the rest out of pocket. The next thing is, what happens if you don't like that flight school? Everything's all great in the beginning, but you get in and you realize you're not getting scheduled enough. You don't really like the instructors. This isn't exactly what you thought it was going to be. So, you found a better solution through word of mouth, because once you kind of get plugged into the pilot community, you start to make friends with other student pilots. You guys start to compare and contrast other flight schools, which you may or may not like, unless you found a better flight school. So you want to go on over there and jump to greener pastures. But because you paid up front, there is this clause that says they actually are going to take out $20,000 of penalties out of this loan. So you get no flight training, but you owe the school $20,000. That's detrimental. That's devastating. Considering most flight loans, or all flight training loans, are considered personal unsecured loans. There's no collateral for the financial institution to take from you if you default on the loan. So most of these loans are high interest rate. You got to think you're making an investment in your future, and there's nothing for you to give the bank. So they're going to give you money to hopefully one day go make, six figures at the airlines or whatever job you want to take. But they're going to take it at a price. And that's just a reality situation. We have to be prepared for that. We have to be good stewards of our monies and smart and plan ahead. So it's going to come out of a price of a relatively high interest rate. Well, if you leave that flight school because you thought everything was great in the beginning, you paid upfront for everything, and they have this clause where they take out $20,000 worth of fees, now you are in some serious debt. Why does that matter? Because when you become a flight instructor after your flight training, which is for 80 to 90% of most people that graduate from flight training, that's what they do. Your income is not a lot. It's going to be somewhere between the $30,000 to $40,000 range. You're basically trading your time for experience without hopefully incurring more debt. And that time is going to be limited to hopefully 2 to 3 years if you're at a good flight school, and then you're going to go off and have a successful career professionally. But your bills are due during that time period. So if you take out, and I've seen this in the past, and this is horrible, but I've seen students go to some accelerated programs, take out a $120,000 loan, and the financial institution's looking at this. This is a high-risk loan. They charge them 16% interest. Now they owe $1,500 every month for their flight training loans because they did a full deferment program for a year so they could get through the training. Then 6 months after, so they get hired, and the loan is just sitting there, and it's just this massive burden every month that they got to pay, and then they're only making $33,000 a year. That is devastating. So make sure that you're fully prepared for what you have to pay for. Make sure you get a good quote. Make sure you think about all of these clauses that these schools want you to sign up for. Is there a huge penalty fee if I leave early, if I'm forced to pay all up front? Is there some type of training deposit that I need ahead of time if I'm paying out of pocket? You need to be really prepared for these things, and so that way you can make sure that you can fund the rest of your training you can get through. Finances are the #1 reason people quit flight training, and I don't want that to happen to you.